Do you ever wonder what Pep Guardiola's brother Pere is up to? Well, exactly 1 year ago today, the team where he's chairman topped the table in Spain for a brief hot moment. Team Girona. And the question is, are they a nourishing feel-good story of a plucky underdog or a harbinger of an existential threat that will ultimately destroy football from the inside? Why can't they be both? This European Nights YouTube episode is brought to you by our great friends at New Balance, the incredible innovative creative brand behind the boot, giving players total control of the ball and the game. Tequila, touch, perfected. Since Pere and City Football Group, who actually own 13 clubs in 5 different continents, since they acquired Girona, with Pere acting as club chairman, the team have risen up that Spanish football pyramid, culminating in last season's third place La Liga finish. Champions League berth that came with it. But before we dive deeper into Girona, Rory, answer the question that's on everybody's mind. Who is Pere Guardiola? What's he like? And what's his role in taking Girona from, well, I don't know how you say it in Spanish, zero to hero?
He has always worked in the football industry. He worked at Nike managing players' commercial relationships. And then in sort of 2009, 2010, he struck out on his own as an agent. That's not an unfamiliar route at all. But obviously, I think it's probably fair to say he had a bit of a leg up, not just because of the relationships he had with players at Barcelona as a Nike representative, but because of who his brother is. You know, he comes from a footballing family, and that carries weight in football, and that's not meant to diminish his achievements whatsoever. But he got a reputation for being a sort of elite client manager, effectively. You know, he looked after a select group of players very, very well, and he did right by them. And in agency, that's basically all you can ask for. You never heard about anything untoward with Pere Guardiola. You never heard about him poaching other agency clients, anything like that. He had his stable, and his stable were high quality and relatively small, and that kind of worked for him.
But Pere is just the shiny bald head to the large body politic of Manchester City-Girona relationship, because since that City Group takeover, Girona's continued to be a landing spot for City sales and loans. Last season's Cinderella squad was full of City products like right back Jan Kotor and midfielder Yangel Herrera. Then there's Delphi Gelli, Girona's president. He only happened to be roommates once with Pep Guardiola at La Masia, Barcelona's youth academy. Girona's also had full access to the City Group scouting network. Even Pep's coaching sessions in Manchester would get shared with the entire stable of City Group clubs as coaching aides. But joining City Group, it's a bit like choosing Christopher Multisanti as your AA sponsor. They might introduce you to David Lee Roth, but they might also beat you up and steal your BMW. Case in point, Savino, the 20-year-old Brazilian sports car of a winger, breakout star for Girona last season, who was sold to Manchester City this summer for nearly $30 million plus potential add-ons. Savino, whom Girona manager Michel called the best player I've ever coached, is really the platonic ideal for City Football Group's player development path. Came to Girona on loan last season from French side Troyes, who will, you've guessed it, also owned by City Football Group, before taking La Liga by storm, subsequently joining those Manchurian overlords this campaign, where he's already made 9 Premier League starts for Pep's side. Rory, is the Savino sale a beacon that we're entering an age where these smaller clubs in the ownership group tree are going to be the footballing equivalent, essentially of minor league baseball teams who get their best players fleetingly only before they're called up to the bigs? Do these development systems actually really work, I guess I'm asking?
I think if you take the example of Savino, then yes, that's the logic, that you will sign him from Brazil, sign him to a French team, and then weirdly, to be fair, in the case of Savino, loan him out to a team that's completely outside the system in PSV Eindhoven. Then you will send him to another team in the group where he will develop, and then you will sell him once he's good enough to the main team in the group, the predator team in the group. The thing is, that's basically the only example. Outside of the Red Bull network, where it works relatively smoothly, Dominic Szoboszlai, who's now at Liverpool, being the best example of Salzburg-Leipzig bid move, there's not many others who've done it, and there's now 200 clubs across Europe, plus a lot more in the sort of wider footballing landscape in Brazil, in Japan, in the States, who are part of these networks. And to be honest, the number of players who you can look at and say they have climbed the ladder in exactly the way that these things are meant to work is vanishingly small. It's difficult to say whether Girona are a fairy tale or not. That's one of the weird things about this story, that it feels wonderful to see another team competing with Barcelona and Real Madrid as they did last season. It feels wonderful to see another Spanish side in the Champions League. It feels great that this little team from this beautiful town in Catalonia has suddenly found itself kind of on the grandest footballing stage of all. But I'm not quite sure how we should feel about it. Like, are we meant to feel good? Are we meant to feel like this is really romantic and nice? Or are we meant to feel as though this is kind of this corporate behemoth that's kind of dominating things?
Yeah, I mean, this is really the core question, which is, despite last season's success, which was unprecedented, I mean, this season has been far from, like, I guess you say, a Jamón Ibérico for Girona. They're currently 9th in La Liga. They lost 4 or 5 games in that drunken bar melee that is the Big Gulp Champions League opening round. They were recently knocked out of the Copa del Rey by a 4th division side, Logroñés. But with that said, under Citigroup, Girona has seemingly solidified its place as a La Liga club. They have stability, far cry from its bankruptcy-ridden days of a decade ago. City's obviously not the only multi-club ownership model. UEFA, for its part, is kind of acted more like a window than a door when it comes to oversight of same ownership clubs playing in the Champions and the Europa League. Girona and Manchester City were deemed free of conflict of interest this past summer after swapping out just a few Girona board members, temporarily banning transfers between the clubs. Yes, that should do it. A philosopher king come soccer correspondent that you may have heard of, one Rory Smith, once wrote, UEFA is, quote, always happy to grant forgiveness, even if you don't ask permission, which I love. But Rory, you've got to the head of the question. Multi-club ownership is clearly, I mean, you meet so many owners, they are fascinated by it. But you also wrote multi-club ownership is, quote, not as much an inevitable conclusion to the sport's flirtation with high finance, but something far closer to an existential threat. So what is that threat, Ro? Can you say that the Girona story, them nipping at the heels of big boys Barca and Real last year, was a lovely things to see, even though you have the awful economic machinations behind the scenes?
I think, yeah, it feels really spoil sporty to say it's horrible and we should all be sad, because it was a brilliant story. You know, Michel, the coach, has done an amazing job. They've got some really good young players who are still there. They lost more than just Jan Couto and Savino in the summer. That's partly why they've kind of regressed a little bit. But, you know, it's great that Girona, as you say, 10 years ago, financial meltdown, existential threat to the club itself, is now solid. The problem with multi-club ownership isn't the one that football thinks it has. I don't think if Girona drew Manchester City in the Champions League knockout rounds, that Girona would A, be instructed to throw the game, or B, try and throw the game, to allow the big daddy through. I don't think that's how it works. It doesn't have a sporting integrity problem for me in terms of them being in the same competition. It has a slight sporting integrity problem in that I think it artificially inflates the capacities of certain teams. But the bigger issue is about the soul of a club. Every single team, all around the world, is supposed to exist to try to win. That is ultimately what they're there for. Even Everton, they are there to try to win. It may not always look like it, Rog, but that's why they exist. The problem with multi-club ownership is it calls that into question. Are Girona, in this case, there to win for Girona, for the greater glory of Girona, to make their fans happy, to make their owners money? Or are they there to rear players for another team? And I think as soon as you have that issue, you have a real problem, because why would you go and watch a team who are just trying to get some players ready so they can play for somebody else? And I think that is a real problem for football. If you have clubs, Girona aren't the best example of it, but if you have clubs who are only there to store players rather than to try and do stuff for themselves, then what exactly are you supporting as a fan?
And the moral of all of this, having a multi-club owner, at least it's better than having no owner at all. Thinking about you sometimes, Everton Football Club. Once again, thank you to our great friends at New Balance for being sponsors of European Nights on the Men in Blazers YouTube channel.